Here's something to ponder. Who is the 1%? There's been a huge push, not in the last year or so, but in the last few years, of the Occupy Wall Street movement, and we've talked a lot about income inequality in America, and I think we're going to talk a lot more about income inequality in America the next couple of years. But a big question that I've been pondering recently, and maybe you've been pondering it, who exactly is the 1%? Everybody who's not the 1% seems to want to be in the 1%, and yet vilifies, talks down upon, and loathes the 1%. But who is the 1%? When we think about the 1%, we think of people who have 3 or 4 homes, a Maserati, a Bentley, a Porsche, and that's just their cars that they have at their second house. But I've been doing some research on this, and it's not really true. The 1%ers, most do not have 18 cars and 4 homes and 3 boats and wear $7,000 Brioni suits. Most are not like that. In fact, I read an article from CNN recently, and they did an independent study into this because they asked the same question that I asked. Who is the 1%? What makes up the 1%? Now, the results are a little bit dated, this report that I'm looking at right here. It's from 2010, but that was a few years ago, and the economy has picked up a little bit, so the numbers are probably a little bit on the lower side, but they're probably relatively the same. So according to CNN, and you're probably not going to believe this, but if you really don't believe it, I can send you this article. I have the article. If you really don't believe this, think about it. According to CNN, in the year 2010, and from now on I'm going to talk about the year 2010, so I'm not going to keep saying 2010 over and over. In 2010, it only took an adjusted gross income, so that's before taxes, but after, your deductions, if you're filing separately or you're filing joint or you have children or all that stuff. So it's before tax, but after adjustments. The average adjusted gross income of the top 1% was only $370,000 a year. Now, yes, that's a lot of money, but it's not really as much as you would think, in that if you live in Manhattan, or you live in Miami, or you live in, Chicago, or Washington, D.C., where if you want a one-bedroom apartment that is not really that great, it's going to cost you $2.5 million. So $370,000 is not really that much in perspective, depending upon where you live. If you make $370,000 a year and you live in Alabama, yeah, that's probably a lot more money. CNN also says that although it only takes $370,000 per year in adjusted gross income to be in the 1%, the average 1%er earned about $1.12 million. So yes, the average earned $1.12 million, but that's the average. So there are a lot less who are earning $1.12 million. And so there are really not that many people out there who are rich. I would argue that if you walked past a 1%er on the street, which you probably do every day without thinking about it, you wouldn't recognize that they were in the 1%. When we think of the 1%, we think doctors and lawyers, which it's not really that true. I would say most of the people in the 1% are celebrities. They're your Hollywood people. They're your athletes. They're your CEOs of Fortune 500 corporations. They're not really most people. And I'll give you a great example. The president of the University of Maryland, Wallace Lowe, his salary is $450,000 a year. Now, he does make a bonus, so his salary and bonus comes out to about $500,000 a year. So technically, he's a 1%er. But I'll tell you, the guy does not own 6 homes. He doesn't drive a Ferrari. He doesn't have some huge 80-foot land yacht that that we've seen. He's not buying $4,000 suits at Nordstrom. If you stood next to the guy and someone told you he only made $150,000 a year, you would believe it. So I continue to argue that the people, when we think of the 1%, we think of Donald Trump and these billionaires. That's only a very small fraction of the 1%. That's, the 1% of the 1% who are the Mitt Romneys and the Rockefellers and the Kennedys. I'm going to argue that most rich people are not taking advantage of the working class and the middle class. The most rich people are paying their fair share. In this CNN report, it says that there were 1.35 million households that accounted for the 1%, and that they earned 19% of the income. So that is interesting that the 1% did earn 1/5 of the income, but they paid 37%, almost 40% of the taxes. So they are paying more tax than the average person. So my argument is that the people who are making $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 a year, who, when you walk next to them on the street, you can't even tell that they're in the 1%, they are paying their fair share. It's the mega rich, the people who are making 30, 40, 50 million a year, 100 million a year, 200 million a year, who have net worths in the billions and billions. Those are the people who were not paying their fair share. So what I would tell you is, I think that when you talk about the 1%, we really need to rethink it. Because most 1%ers are not bad people. They're not bad people. Most of them, odds are, with the amount of people that you know, and the amount of people who live in your neighborhood, and the amount of people that you're related to, and the amount of people that they're friends with, through a friend of a friend, through at least 2 to 3 degrees of separation, you probably know someone who technically makes $370,000 a year who's in the 1%. And yet you probably wouldn't even know. You don't know who they are because you can't tell that they're in the 1%. Because although they technically are on some government form, they're not bringing in $6-7 million a year, and they're very hard to distinguish between other people. So I would suggest to you, and while you ponder this video, think about, before you vilify a group of people, whether you really should be vilifying that whole group of people, or maybe just a very, very small, mega rich portion of it. Stay pondering, America.